Moving into chapter 5, I think is probably one of the most important chapters that we talk about when we're talking about introduction to marketing or principles of marketing. This is because chapter 5 is about understanding consumers. And if we don't understand the consumer, then we're not going to be able to successfully market products to them. Remember, this is all about needs, not wants. If we don't understand their needs, then we can't create a product that they're going to want, or service, or an organization, or an idea. John is the CEO and co founder of Engageo. I may be saying that wrong. Now, this is a biz to business marketing engagement platform. Previously, John was the co founder of Markeo, a leader in marketing automation that was recently acquired by Adobe for $4.8 million. He was named the most influential marketing CEO of the year 2019 of Corporate Excellence Award. A B2B marketing named John as one of the 10 most influential tech marketers in the world. And the CMO Institute named him top 10 CMO for companies under 200. We're just going to go over a few little definitions in the beginning because the word consumer is going to come up a lot, and yet it's slightly different depending on how we're talking about it. So, while a consumer is the ultimate user, the term can also be used to imply the buyer or the decision maker as well as the ultimate consumer. As an example, let's say a mother goes out and buys some cereal for consumption by their child. Now, the child is the ultimate consumer, but the mother would also be considered a consumer. Or a dad who goes and buys a bicycle and for his children. He's considered the consumer even though he may not be the ultimate user. Now, consumer buyer behavior refers to buying behaviors of the final consumer, who are generally the individuals and the households that buy the goods and services for personal consumption. We put these all together, and that makes up the consumer market. Now, what we need to begin to look at in this chapter is how the environment that the consumer market is in, or the actual consumer, how that's going to basically affect the buying characteristics and decision making process of the individual. And in turn, that's going to affect their buyer's response. So these are going to be linked together in making basically a rather complex series of events occur before they actually purchase your product. So, no conversation about consumer behavior can ever really get started without making sure we understand who Abraham Maslow is. So, in 1943, this American psychologist, Abraham Maslow, introduced the world to his theory of human motivation, which basically becomes Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, the theory consists of 5 vital human needs. The most basic falls to the bottom, as you can see. So, physiological needs are our most basic. These are underlying needs that humans can't live without, like food, water, sleep, oxygen. Right now, if you were starving, you wouldn't be listening to this lecture. You'd be going to get something to eat. Safety comes next. We all need to feel safe, whether it's physical, financial, job security, or health. If you'll notice, there are a lot of products that actually advertise towards safety, whether it's your safety in your house or maybe even your financial safety. Social needs, let's remember that humans are social animals. We actually don't live well by ourselves. In fact, we consider it a type of torture to be put by ourselves. So we all look for social connections in whether it's friends or families or even the people we work with, but we look for those social connections. Now, esteem needs, well, we all have a desire to have respect and be respected by others. This includes self esteem, confidence, a self achievement, you might want to say. Finally, if all of those are met, we're going to realize our full potential, and we call this self actualization. Now, this may differ from person to person, and this is the highest level of hierarchy for what we as people are striving for. Now, one of the things I do want you to notice is that not everything is the same type of need. These first two are called basic needs. Meaning is that these are things that we tend to need on an everyday life. If we don't have safety and we don't have our biological or physiological needs taken care of, it's very hard for us to move anywhere else up the ladder or up the pyramid in this case. So the next group of needs, we call these psychological needs. These are things that are sort of more in our mental being. And as humans, we do have mental needs. So we need to have that sense of longing and belonging. We need to feel like we're part of something. And that's very important when we talk about advertising later on in what we pick. So we need to understand what our consumers want to be a member of. And then, of course, there is esteem. So, esteem is working on ourselves, our worthiness. And quite often that's when we're looking at who we feel that we want to be. Now, what is interesting is that this last one, self-actualization, quite often we actually don't call this one a motivator, because by the time you're self-actualized, you are motivated. But the other ones, they are actually much more motivators, you might want to say. They're pushing you up this ladder all the time or up this pyramid, trying to reach you towards self-actualization, which is a place that we all want to be. As far as marketing is concerned, what we really want to do is find out where our people are, because if we can understand that, we'll have a better idea of developing products and services toward that. So, in order to build buyers' personas, it's important to understand our ideal customer challenges, their motivations and goals, and there's so much more we need to understand. By understanding an ideal customer through which basic human needs of your product or service is satisfied, you're able to grasp this deeper understanding of what motivates them. You begin by taking a look at your ideal customer and identifying which needs your products or services satisfy. For instance, if your product is offering a car, consider various needs that car can meet. So, do we need to have biological or physiological? Basically, the size of the car. Could you imagine Shaq in a little car? He needs a certain size car. Safety. You see these ads all the time for cars. They're always advertising how safe a car is. Belonging. Quite often you can see ads that kind of infer that if you're a member of this group, you'd want to have this car. If you're a member of that group, you want to have this car. This is quite often done with age. Basically, cars for younger people, cars for medium age people, cars for older people. And then esteem. Those are the cars where you say, you've worked hard and now it's worth it. Show who you are. You've got basically, you deserve this car. So each one of those you can see if you watch some local ads or you watch some national ads about cars, you will see every level that is picked. So Maslow sort of determined that most individuals stay in one level of hierarchy until it's fully satisfied. The customer buying a car for safety and security is not buying for reasons of self-esteem. Applying this process is a method to make your content more specific and fine-tuned. Now, viewing buyers' personas through this lens creates a larger understanding of where your ideal customer is socially, economically, physically, and through this understanding, you can structure a more targeted content. But it is important to note that your target market's level or needs and desires may not be the same all the time, especially in times of political or economic change. Therefore, you need to keep your marketing strategy up to date and relevant as the times change. I started this lecture a couple of slides back with sort of an introduction to how the environment and a buyer's characteristics influence buyers' behaviors. Consumers' purchases are influenced strongly by culture, social aspects, personality, and psychological characteristics. For the most part, marketers can't control such factors, but we have to take them into account when we start thinking about producing and creating items for our target market. Let's look at culture first. Now, culture is the most basic element within societies, and they also tend to shape a lot about people's wants and their behaviors. Now, notice I said wants and not needs, because needs are basic and biological, but how we satisfy those wants, don't forget, are often shaped by our environment and our culture. So culture, if we want to kind of define it, it's a set of basic values, perceptions, wants, They're usually learned or taught to us from some members of society or other important institutions. A great example is the language you speak. You learn that because of the culture that you're in. It's passed down from generation to generation. The traditions of how you celebrate certain times of the year, they're passed down from generation to generation. They may be refined and altered, but you tend to learn those. That's all culture. Now, within a culture, there are subcultures. And this is a group of people with some sort of shared value system based on a common life experiences and situations. A total market strategy integrates both the ethnic themes and cross-cultural perspectives within a brand's mainstream marketing. They're appealing to consumer similarities across the subcultures rather than their differences. So we can think of a subculture perhaps as bikers, or Southerners, or Westerners. These are subcultures, a group that you're a member of. Now, a social class is slightly different than a subculture. A social class is a relatively permanent and some sort of ordered division in a societies whose members share similar values, interests, and behavior patterns. It's often a measure through things like occupation, income, education, wealth, and other variables. In the United States, one of the easiest, maybe, social classes to see is blue collar workers versus white collar workers. However, even the lines between those are blurred. You might look at the super rich versus the medium income people versus the poor. Those can often be considered social classes. In some countries and cultures, they are very distinct social classes. In the United States, they're a little bit more blurred, but we can often see where they are. Now, a consumer's behavior is also influenced by what we say are social factors. Now, these are a little bit different. Social factors are things like groups, and the group that you're a member of can have direct influence onto which, personal belongings you have. And generally, the groups that we're a member of, we call these membership groups. Real original in the naming, I know. Aspirational groups are the ones that we want to belong to. And reference groups serve as direct or indirect points of comparison or referencing a form of person's attitude or behavior. Now, an opinion leader is a person within a reference group who, because of some sort of special skills, knowledge, their personality, some other characteristic, have the ability to influence others. Opinion leaders are also sometimes referred to as influencers these days. Now, you can see an opinion leader because people will look to them about what perhaps they should do. In some cases, I like to use the example of computers. I know a little bit about computers, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I will tend to look to people who I feel know more about computers than I when it comes to buying new computers. Thus, they can have an opinion or they can influence what I purchase. Now, this is going to become really important when we start talking about information searching. Now, another word that's out there a lot is something called buzz marketing. And what buzz marketing means is that we're simply enlisting, or sometimes we're even creating, opinion leaders to serve as brand ambassadors who can spread the word about our company's products. We always have to remember that families have a strong influence on buying behaviors. Marketers are interested in the roles and the influence of people like husbands, wives, and children on purchasing product. We don't think about it much, but the truth is that purchasing certain items within a family structure tends to fall about certain groups of people. Some interesting research that was done, well, maybe about 20 years ago, found that it was actually wives who were the most likely to purchase men's underwear, because they tend to purchase underwear for their husbands. As such, packaging began to change to basically attract women to those underwear and not to men, since it isn't men who is buying the underwear in the first place. So by understanding the family roles and who does what, we can then help make and produce a product toward those people. Now, a person's position within a group can be defined in terms both of their roles and status. A person usually produces I won't say produces, usually purchases, products that are appropriate to their roles or status. In some cases, we know people want to try to purchase products that are above or below their status, but they're even doing that on purpose. Now, a role is basically a set of acceptable behavior patterns that we have for a group of people. And those acceptable behavior patterns would include things like girls wearing pink and boys wearing blue. Now, I know that a lot of guys are now wearing pink, but it's still kind of like, oh, he's wearing pink. Or you see t-shirts that say, real men wear pink. Because we still see this as sort of the role of women to wear pink. We may think of roles as far as even types of cars. We may say that, the mom will drive the minivan and the dad will drive the four-door sedan. Status is more about where we feel we fit within a society. And status is often gained through our occupation, our knowledge, and our skills. And so if my occupation is of a certain level, I may want to buy a certain car to fulfill that status. Now, beyond the social, the next thing that sort of comes along is basically what we say personal. These are things about an individual. A buyer's decision is influenced by the person's characteristic of the buyer. As an example, a person's occupation affects the goods and services bought through the market. Now, a marketer is going to try to identify an occupational group that have above average interest in their products and their services. A company then can specialize in making products that either fulfill that need of that given occupational group or will influence that group to purchase something. As an educator, I need a very simple system in order to produce lectures in something that I don't have to learn a great deal. I'm not a professional video editor, and so thus they have created within PowerPoint a way for me to simply make a video. And so that specializes towards your instructors, and you'll find a lot of instructors will use PowerPoint because of that. If I was a video editor, this would probably look a lot different. But we also have to think things like taste in food, clothing, furniture, recreation are often age related. Buying also is shaped by your life cycle. Somebody who is 20 is probably buying very different products than somebody who is 50. People who are 20 are just starting out in life. Their furniture choices are going to be different than people who are 50. And people who are 60 maybe in their highest income level as far as disposable income in their life. So they might be able to splurge more, where a 20-year-old won't be able to splurge as much. So that person's economic situation will affect his or her stores and product choices. Marketers watch for spending trends and personal income savings and interest rates. We know as those change, what you want to buy is going to change. When there's times of plenty, people will buy more steaks. People will eat out more. When times are a little harder, we're going to be purchasing a lot less steak and a lot more chicken, and people will cut back on the amount of times they eat out each week. Although what is interesting is one study found that while people may have pulled back on how often they eat out when the times are a little harder, they found that the check when they did eat out was more money than in the past. And in many cases, they wound up spending the same amount of money. It's just they spent it all in one sitting rather than having 3 or 4 meals out. And that's because when people weren't making a lot of money and they went out to eat, they decided that they would splurge. They had earned this after all. And if they were going to finally get a chance to go out because they haven't been able to go out because they haven't been able to spend any money, they were going to get what they wanted. So instead of having 5 lunches out, which may have added up to $30, they ate one expensive meal with a dessert and a drink. Lifestyle patterns is basically a person's pattern of living as expressed by his or her psychographics. It involves measuring consumers' activities, their interests, their opinions. Lifestyle concept can help marketers understand changing consumers' values and how they'll affect buyers' behavior. Personality basically refers to those unique psychological characteristics that distinguish a person or maybe even a group of people. They can be useful in analyzing consumer behavior for certain products or brand choices. A person's self-concept is also made use by marketers. The idea that a person's possessions contribute to and reflect their identities is strongly seen in many products that we pick, especially in things like clothing. even cars. Now, the last thing we're going to look at is called psychological, or our psychographics. The psychological makeup of a person will come into play when they're examining consumer behavior. Motivation or drive is a need that is basically strong enough to pressure a person to seek some sort of satisfaction. So we went over that needs are basic and biological, and wants satisfied needs. And when a want is strong enough, it will drive you to an action. That action will then reduce the need, but the need will come back. So many companies will employ teams of psychologists and other social sciences to carry out just motivational research to see how we can drive the need to an action. Perception is the process through which people select, organize, and interpret information to form meaningful pictures of the world. Now, selective distortion describes a tendency of people to interpret information in a way that will support what they already believe, where selective retention means that consumers are more likely to remember good points made about a brand that they favor and forget the points about competing brands. Apple is very good at bringing their consumers in, and when you talk to a person who is very strongly an Apple consumer, they have a lot of selective retention and remember a lot of what they like about a product, and quite often can't tell you anything or very little about other products. Now, learning describes a change in an individual's behavior arising from some sort of experience. The practical significance of learning theory for marketers is that they can build up demand for a product by associating it with a strong drive using motivational clues and providing positive reinforcement. So here comes back to your Psychology 101. We're talking about operant and classical conditioning. A belief is a description through or a thought that a person holds about something. Marketers are interested in beliefs that people formulate about specific products and services because these beliefs make up the product or the brand's image that affect buying behaviors. Finally, attitudes put people in a frame of mind of liking or disliking things and motivating them to or from them. All of these things will combine to create the buyer. So the more that we understand each aspect of this, the stronger we'll be able to influence those buyers' decision making in favor of our product. Buyer's decision process model is going to look, to be honest, kind of easy, but it's not as easy. It's much more detailed than we think. I mean, the first stage in the model is need recognition. If a consumer doesn't recognize a need, then they're not going to develop a want. And if they don't develop a want, they're not going to be driven to an action that would hopefully involve your service or product. Marketers sometimes even have to instruct or educate consumers about the needs that they have. As an example, we might need to educate consumers that they don't want bad breath because bad breath could get you ostracized at the office. And so if you don't want to be ostracized at the office, then you're going to need to have good breath. And to have good breath, you're going to want this particular product. And hopefully that will begin to drive some sort of action. But if I don't recognize the need in the first place, then I'm never going to want your product. The next is information search. So as consumers begin to recognize they have a need, they're going to start to seek some information to help restore or resolve that need. Depending on the product and basically the risk of the product would depend on how much information they're going to seek. And some of those other things that we just talked about in the last slide will also influence how much information they're going to seek. The more major the purchase, the more likely that there could be a negative outcome to that purchase, the more information people are going to seek. So if you think about buying a house versus buying a candy bar, we're talking about tremendously different types of information searching. So if I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to want a lot of information. I'm going to want outside information, things that are outside the company perhaps, things such as what's the neighborhood like, what kind of schools are in the area. I don't get to control those. Those are non-marketing controlled information. I'll do my best to try to control those. But I have to also understand that when I'm looking for a house, the consumer is also going to go online and look at things like Zillow, which may or may not carry information that I desire about my house. But we're also going to have marketing controlled information. Now, if I'm a real estate agent selling that house, or I'm the owner selling that house, I can make a brochure, I can make a website, I can do all kinds of things, and I can control the information that's on that particular website. But the consumer is also just going to look internal for information that they already know. And so when going to buy a house, they're going to perhaps inside themselves already know some things, like they want a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They want to be on the water, or they want to be in the mountains, or they don't want to be here, they want to be here. And they already know those pieces of information, so they're not going to seek that information out. But if we're talking about buying a candy bar, most of you are just going to use your internal information. You're going to walk into a 7-Eleven, you're going to look at the selection, and internally you're going to know which one that you want. Now, here's the funny thing, though. The reason that you know that internal decision is because you've already gone through the hard process of trying things. It's one reason why if you take a 5-year-old in and you tell them they can buy any candy bar they want, this is the hardest decision for them. For you, it's a very simple decision. The reason is that the 5-year-old hasn't tried all these candy bars before. And for them, it's a very risky decision. If you don't like the candy bar, you'll just buy another candy bar. But the 5-year-old doesn't have the money to buy another candy bar. They're completely dependent on the person buying the candy bar for that purchase. So they have to be very careful in that selection. Now, what happens is over time, the 5-year-old will have tried many different candy bars. That's why at Halloween, we like to give out these little minis, or we want people to buy the mini candy bars and give a kid 2 or 3 different candy bars so the kid can try 2 or 3 different candies. Now, that sounds like all nice and wonderful, but it's not really. It's something marketers do early on because we know that your choice in candy bar selection is going to happen very early in your life. You're going to find your 3 or 4 favorite candy bars early on, and you tend to stick with those until the rest of your life. We call this an evoke set. Now, if I'm not in your evoke set, then I'm never going to be one of your selections. So it's really important that I get into the evoke set. That includes with a house. If I'm not in the right neighborhood or I don't have the right number of bathrooms, I'm never even going to become part of your evoke set. And if I'm not part of the evoke set, I'm never going to be part of the decision. So we're always researching what is it that people are looking for. So the little kid may be looking for size, or they may be looking for fruit flavor. If you'll notice, the younger generation doesn't eat as much chocolate. Why? Because they were raised on more fruit flavor things. So they want things like Skittles and gummy bears and, Sour Patch Kids. Where older adults tended to have gotten more chocolate. And so they want things like Hershey bars and Hershey Kisses. Each group has formed this evoke set, but their information has come internally. So as we go back to this, we have 3 types of information. We have internal information, we have marketing controlled information, and we have non-marketing controlled information. And depending on how risky the purchase will depend on how much information your consumer is going to seek. From there, they're going to begin to evaluate the alternatives. Now remember, I said you've got to get into the evoke set. So we're going to assume that you've made it into the evoke set. Now I'm going to go look at these 5 or 6 houses. Perhaps I've talked to this real estate agent and I've said, I'll go look at 6 houses today, but I've already eliminated houses in certain neighborhoods or certain areas. So I've already looked at those, said no. Now I'm going to go out and look at 4 or 5 more houses. These I then begin to evaluate for all kinds of things. And that becomes a question. What is it that the consumer is using for their evaluation? And that's something that marketers are constantly looking at. Is it time? Is it location? Is it the amount of work that has to be done? Is it price? That's where sort of some of the art of marketing comes in, but it's not an art without a lot of research. So we're going to evaluate the alternatives, just like that 5-year-old who's standing there in front of all those candy bars and evaluating their alternatives. Once we've evaluated the alternatives, we're going to purchase. The purchasing decision sometimes is very quick and easy because as an adult, you have lots of money. You can just walk in, buy the candy bar, and walk out. But for the 5-year-old, that decision was very difficult. After you've made the decision, though, we have what we call post-purchase behavior. Now, the post-purchase behavior is kind of interesting because the more risky the purchase, the more likely you're going to have some post-purchase behavior. Now, this is determining if the consumer is basically satisfied or dissatisfied with their purchase, lies in the relationship between my expectations and the product's perceived performance. However, all major purchases will tend to result in what we call cognitive dissonance or discomfort by the post-purchase conflict. Have you ever noticed that if you get a new car, right after you buy the car, you see that car all over the place? You didn't see it before. It's one reason why you'll see that marketers, after you've made a major purchase, such as a car or a house or something else large, will send you things saying, what a great decision you've made. You've made the best decision of your life. They really want to make sure that they reduce your post-purchase conflict as much as possible. That's quite often what warranties are for, or 800 numbers. The more that you feel like you have a way to be satisfied, the more likely that post-purchase behavior, that cognitive dissonance, will be lessened. Now, post-purchase customer satisfaction is the key to building profitable customer relationships. Most marketers go beyond merely meeting the customer's expectations. They aim to delight the customers. In summary, when making a purchase, buyers go through a decision-making consisting of a need recognition, information searching, and the information level will depend on the risk or the amount of information we seek, the evaluation of alternatives, basically purchasing, and the post-purchase behavior. During need recognition, remember the consumer recognizes a problem or need that could be satisfied by a product or service. And once the need is recognized, the consumer moves into the information stage. Information on hand, the consumer proceeds to the alternative evaluation, and then eventually assessing brands as far as a choice set, or we call the evoke set. From there, the consumer makes that decision and actually buys the products, and that final stage again is the post-purchase behavior in which we decide whether or not we were satisfied or dissatisfied. So the marketer's job is to understand the buyer's behavior at each stage and influencing what is going on and the decision making of the individual. The adoption process is the mental process through which an individual passes from first learning about an innovation to the final adoption of that product. Consumers generally go through 5 stages in this process of adopting a new one, which, remember, could be a product, a service, or even an idea. But it has to be perceived as the customer as something new. It may not actually be new to the world, but it may be new to that customer. So our first stage is going to be awareness. In this stage, the consumer becomes aware of the new product, but they lack information perhaps about it. So let's say we have a diabetic, and the diabetic has always been using the meter that they've had. But now there's a new meter that will read their blood sugar, and it talks. They've become aware of this, which means that they now may become interested. Now, this means is that it involves a customer seeking out information about the new product. So in this case, being aware of it and now interested, I may want to know whether it is available in my local area. Will that meter use the current strips or other things that I have that go with my current reader? Would the doctor be able to use it? Would my medical insurance be able to assess it or pay for it? So in this third stage, we're going to get evaluation, where the consumer considers whether trying the new product makes any sense. So I've got this idea of this meter that will read the numbers out to me, instead of using the one that I currently have, which doesn't read the numbers to me. It doesn't speak. I have to decide whether or not the innovation is worth getting the new product. That included the cost. And remember, I said I was kind of curious if the current products I have that go along with my meter will work with the new meter. I'm evaluating all that. But let's say that I have decided that it makes sense because I'm having a hard time seeing. Maybe my eyes are going because I've gotten older. So not only am I having a hard time seeing the blood spot, but I'm having a hard time reading the numbers. So I've evaluated and it tends to make sense. Now I may go into a trial. At this stage, the consumer tries a new product, perhaps on a small scale, to improve his or her estimate of the value. So in some cases, I may say, look, I'll try this for 30 days. And that's why trial periods are often very important. In other cases, it may be something small, and you're just going to buy a small amount of it first to see. When you're trying maybe a new dressing, you order a small amount of it or you get a small bottle of it from the store. You don't usually go out and buy the big one first. But sticking with the meter, one of our problems will be is that trial period. If I don't get the opportunity to try it, I may not want to make the expense or the jump to that new product. And so we'll have to address that in a couple more slides, how that can be a problem to actually stopping the adoption of a product. All of these things can basically lead to a product not being adopted. And so the final stage would be to adopt the product because the consumer decides to make a full and regular use of that product. Either I've changed dressings or I've decided to change my meter. Anywhere along these 5 steps, if it's not done correctly, the consumer is basically not going to adopt the product. There are 5 adopter categories that are classified by degree of how quickly an individual will adopt a new innovation or idea. Each adopter category possesses unique characteristics and requires a different set of strategies to influence the desired adoption innovation or the ideas. So our first group, which is a very small percentage of the population, as you can see, these individuals adopt new technologies or ideas simply because, well, they're new. Innovators tend to take more risks than other groups, and they tend to be a lot more venturesome. Now, one thing you do have to remember is that just because somebody may be an innovator or one of the other adopter categories in technology, it doesn't mean that they're going to be the same level in another area. And I keep talking about ideas and services and other products. So you can have somebody who has the most fancy computers at home, but they may not be adopting into online food delivery. They may feel that they want to go to a store. They like the old fashioned way of going out and picking their own food and seeing which fruit that they want. And yet you have other people who don't have very high tech computers who may be very much into using the click service of being able to have somebody else pick all the stuff for them. So we also have to remember that these innovators and the other groups that we're going to talk about, they may be different individuals, but the group is still there. So we have to look at an individual 2 ways. One, are they an innovator in this category? In this case, I'm using communication devices. Are they an innovator also in perhaps wine selection? They may not be. So our next group are what we call early adopters. This group tends to actually be very important because they tend to create the opinions which propel trends. They're not unlike innovators in how quickly they take on new technologies and ideas. But what's really interesting, they're more concerned about their reputation of being ahead of the curve. These are quite often the influencers on social media. What they don't want to do is be seen with a dog product, you might want to say. They think that it's cool, they talk about it, and then they find out it's not. So they're very cautious. I mean, they'll take it on, but they've got to feel that this is going to be a trend. Why? Because the early majority, which is 34% of the population, if an idea or an innovation enters into this group, it tends to become widely adopted before long. This group makes decisions based on utility and practical benefits, basically over coolness. So this is a group who may be adopting those new iPhone 11s because they see that there's an advantage to them that the other iPhones haven't had. Now, the late majority shares some traits with the early majority, but it's much more cautious before committing. They need to be handheld as they adopt. They tend to be skeptical about moving to something new. So they may still have the iPhone 8s and they may be questioning, why would I even want to move up to an iPhone 11? I don't see any real huge advantage in my life for having an iPhone 11 versus an iPhone 8. So we're going to have to sort of handheld them up. In some cases, this is why we have marketing programs that say, hey, if you trade up, we'll trade up for free or for very little cost, because it may be the only way we get these late majority people to move up. And then there's the laggers. Well, the laggers is slow to adapt any newer idea or technology. They tend to adapt only when they are basically either forced to or because everybody else already has. They tend to be very suspicious of innovation. The characteristics of the actual product, idea, or service is going to absolutely influence the adoption of that product, service, or idea. So, relative advantage is basically the degree to which innovation is perceived as being better than what it replaces. Relative advantage is associated with economic profitability generally. However, economics is not the only consideration in determining relative advantage for a consumer. Let's go back to looking at buying a house. Now, we may want to look at when we're purchasing that house whether the new house is going to fit within our budget, and perhaps we feel that this house has a better value than the last house that we owned. We may want to look at it and say, hey, am I going to be able to save money and time because it's closer to where I live? But there are other things that we're going to put in place to think about as far as a relative advantage of that particular location, and maybe the school district that it's in. We feel that that school is superior to the school that my current child is going to. Or maybe we look at the location because we want to be in a community that has a pool because we want a pool, but we don't want to clean a pool, so we want a community with a pool. Or maybe we want to be out in the country because of the quietness and the more zen that we need. Those are all relative advantages, but not all of them are for economic reasons. Compatibility is the degree to which innovation is perceived as consistent with our existing values, our past experiences, and the needs of the potential adopter. Each innovation must be compatible with the individual's values, ideas, and needs. So when I look at this house, I have to make sure it's compatible with my family needs. Does it have a kitchen that's big enough? Does it have enough bedrooms? Does it have enough bathrooms? Is there enough room for us to do what it is that we're looking to do? If it's not compatible, then why would I buy the new place? I might as well just stay where I'm at, or I'm going to go on and look at another location. Complexity is the degree to which innovation is perceived as being difficult to understand and use. The more complex the innovation, the slower the rate of adoption. Now, the use of a house is generally not too complex in one way, in that we put the key in the door and you sleep in the bedrooms, hopefully, and you cook in the kitchens. So where would complexity come in? Well, for a house, complexity might come into more about buying the house. How hard is it to buy the house, get the mortgage, and do things like this? If it's too complex, then the person may not be able to make the different steps. We could also look at the technology within the house in this case. If we have an older person, they may not want some of the newest high-tech innovations. They go to look at this refrigerator and it's got Wi-Fi this and internet that and push this button to do this. And all they want is a refrigerator that they open up and put their milk in. They go to look at the air conditioner and again, it's Wi-Fi this and internet that. And all they want to be able to do is say, I want it at 80 degrees. So complexity, not as much with houses, but the more complex something appears to be, the harder it's going to be for the next person to want to adopt it. Now, divisibility or triability, I've seen both names used for this, but they both mean the same thing. It's the degree to which innovation may be experienced or experimented on in a limited basis. What we're talking about here is, can I try out this concept, idea, or product or service? So quite often, especially with services, the first time you get to try it for free. If you want to go to a new streaming service, you get a month free. That's how they overcome the triability. But how do we overcome the triability in a house? Because after all, I'm not going to let you move into the house to try it. Well, Maybe I will. On more expensive houses, things that are up in those $10 million range and more, quite often a person can go and stay in it for the weekend and try it out. After all, if I'm about to plop down 50 million, I think I can let you stay there for the weekend and give the house a try. But on less expensive houses, your triability is going to be able to come in, walk around, and take a look at it. But then what about a candy bar? Well, triability, as we talked about, can be difficult for 5-year-olds to try a candy bar. And that's why most of the companies make those little mini candies that they want you to give out at Halloween. They want you to give out 2 or 3 different varieties because that's where a kid gets their triability from all these free little chocolates that they get here, there, everywhere. They actually make those pretty inexpensive at Halloween so that you will want to give them out and the kid can try a variety of candy. You're actually helping them because remember, the young kid is going to begin to develop their evoke set as far as candy, and they're going to do it early on. So perhaps not making any money on Halloween candy, or at least not much, is really going to, in the end, help me because I'm going to have a customer for life once they've decided that they do like those Skittles that they got to try, or they like those M&Ms that they got to try. Now the last one, again, 2 words, same thing, communability and observability. And basically the degree to which the results of the innovation are visible to others. The easier it is for others to see the results of the innovation, the more likely they'll adopt it. Well, YouTube has been probably the greatest thing for this because people can see what this item is. So not too long ago, I decided I wanted to buy a breakfast maker, but I didn't know much about it. So I was able to go out on YouTube, watch people who bought the product, unbox it, make sandwiches with it, and I felt pretty comfortable because I could observe how it was used. Well, the same with a house. I can go on Zillow, I can observe the house, I can look at the house, and others will also be able to do that with me. So all these characteristics definitely influence the rate of adoption. As marketers, we have to figure out which ones of these are going to basically be stumbling blocks perhaps for our potential market, and we're going to have to find ways to overcome them. This is the end of this lecture. I hope you'll join me for the next lecture. If you need to contact me, please contact Ramona B. at kaiseruniversity.edu, and we'll see you soon for Chapter 6.